Thank you all for coming to the Wings of History Museum. And like the name implies, we're about history, but we're about history with wings. And today we're going to talk about a monumental event that took place 82 years ago, if my calculations are right. And I'm going to take you back in history a little bit to a very low point in the United States. And it was following Pearl Harbor. The war in Europe had been going on for almost 2 years. And all of a sudden, Pearl Harbor was attacked. And at the time of Pearl Harbor, this is the relative size of our opponents who had battle-hardened experience. This was the U.S. defense situation. Sad, demoralizing. This was Pearl Harbor. We've seen a lot of these pictures. And the United States population, there was a lot of fear. People didn't know what to expect. They know that Hitler had been taking territory. The Japanese had been running the Pacific. And they needed to do something. So a plan was put in place. Let's do some sort of a counterattack. We can't bring anything to Japan. We didn't have the forces, so let's just do a little surprise attack or something. A submarine commander came up with the idea of putting Army airplanes on an aircraft carrier and seeing if we could do something to Japan. How far it was, how the carriers were, very challenging situations. And so the man picked to do it is Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. He had a PhD in aero engineering. He was a test and race pilot. He was an Army officer, great leadership skills, became a general at the end of World War II. And what we needed was some good news, whatever it was. We just needed some good news for the American people as they began rearming, volunteering, training, rebuilding a brand new Army, Air Force, Army Air Corps, and Navy, and getting the home front going. So we needed to buy some time in the Pacific. And so Doolittle in 42, this was the plan. We all know this. They used Army medium bombers. We'll talk about the choices in a minute. They needed a low-level training because it needed to be a surprise attack. We didn't have that. The Japanese had us outnumbered in carriers, so our carriers were very precious, and some people were very reluctant to even risk it. But Franklin Roosevelt made the decision. At that time, the Hornet 1 was brand new, it was the pride of the Navy, and that was chosen to carry the B-25s. There were several aircraft that were possible. We'll take a picture of them. You'll agree that the Douglas B-18 Bolo is not only an old design, but it was also way too ugly. The A-20 Havoc was actually available at the time. Too small of wings, too fast, would take too much distance on the carrier to take off. The North American B-25 was just right, sort of the Goldilocks, right? And with 25 knots of wind and 25 knots on the carrier, it could get off in the 500 feet required. So there's the Bolo. Do you agree? There's the A-20. Looks great, but not a big enough wing. B-25, perfect. And so that's what was chosen. They went through some of the best pilots in the Army Air Corps and whittled it down from there. There are just some numbers. I know people ask a lot of questions. We can go back and look at some of these, but it was as we know, it was the right airplane. Here's some performance numbers on it. Air-cooled, Wright engines. We've got an example over in Hangar 2. Gross weight, 29,000. It had a normal 6-man crew. They eliminated the tail gunner, put in 2 broomsticks instead to lighten the weight, carry more fuel, more bombs. Normal range 1200, they extended the range to 2000. Normal cruise speed 230, slow it down, get better economy and better range. There's just some numbers that might come up. We won't go into that unless there's questions. But again, it was designed for a purpose initially that had to be modified because of this mission. What they needed was range. A lot of you know this. There's two types of drag. Airplanes, there's induced drag, lift drag that increases with low speed, and there's form drag that increases with speed. So there's kind of a sweet spot, and depending on headwinds, you're going to fly around this limited airspeed. There's a picture of myself and a friend, and we went for a ride in the Collins B-25 a number of years ago at Moffett. And you can get the size of it. And normal crew, as I said, is 6. They eliminated the tail gunner. They didn't, hopefully, and it turned out they were right. Well, not right for everyone, but the main thing was surprise, speed, and range to get to where they were going. There's Doolittle's crew. There's Doolittle. There's Cole. He just passed away a few years ago, his co-pilot. And that was his crew.
What were the crew members? Pilot, co-pilot, navigator? What are the other guys doing?
They had a top gunner who was a navigator. They had a bombardier in the nose cone. Okay. And I think they had a radio operator who did something else. Everybody was cross-trained. So the idea was, yes, surprise, surprise, surprise. We've got to completely surprise them. They've got to get close enough. They've got to extend the range. And the plan was to bomb Japan, fly to Tuchau, China, land. They had a homing beacon there. 2 carriers. The Hornet, the Enterprise. We didn't have any battleships because of Pearl Harbor, of course, available. They did have some heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, 2 submarines, 2 oilers. And the Hornet loaded up with the B-25s right here at Alameda Naval Air Station on April 2nd. There's a picture. We've got another picture there of it, but there they are on the deck and on their way to a rendezvous point with the Enterprise and the other ships. There's the crew, air crews, waiting in the ready room. Again, Doolittle said one of the strongest things in the world is the heart of a volunteer. And you'll see that he's right. So, of course, the aircraft carrier is pitching in high seas. This is a shot from the Enterprise of the Hornet. It had fighters available. Doolittle received awards from the Japanese. You know, he was a air racer, and we had exchange students. We're going to talk about Yamamoto. He was an exchange student with the U.S. Navy. We had, you know, in the 30s, countries were sort of cooperating a little bit, maybe to avoid war. We were trying to do some things. And so Yamamoto was very familiar with the U.S. Doolittle and other people had received awards in Japan and had been there. And although people thought a war would be coming, nobody was really sure until close to Pearl Harbor, when it's pretty obvious. The plan was to launch right here, bomb Tokyo, and then fly to China, long haul here. These are distances, long ways. There's Chaochu. Unfortunately, the plan got rushed. They were discovered by a Japanese picket ship, 7:30 in the morning, long before they wanted to go, 200 miles before they wanted to go. The picket ship sent out a very short signal, so they weren't sure exactly what was sent. So it was either go then, push the B-25s over the deck, bring the fighters up, turn around, head for home. Like I say, we were way outnumbered, way outgunned. We didn't have time to lose a carrier or 2. Doolittle and all of them decided to go. They loaded fuel on the airplane that they could put inside the airplane, transfer it to the fuel tanks, and they took off. Now, 220 miles to Japan, 2,200 miles to Japan, no certainty, probably a night landing. That was not the plan. Everybody volunteered. Everybody volunteered. So there's Doolittle was the first to take off. They had a couple people there. One guy, the pilot of course would run the engine up, set everything up, tell him he's ready, and then this officer would signal when the pitch was right. He wanted the pitch of the carrier to be right to get off. He didn't want to. And then there's another gentleman down here who's from Wright Engine Company, and you couldn't hear it. It was loud there, and there was wind. And they needed to know if those engines were just right. And so he also confirmed that even though the crew of the B-25 was running up the engine, checking all the instruments, they wanted one last check to make sure there's nothing wrong with the engine, from the sound of it. And this guy was an expert. So away they went. And Doolittle was first, got off. They had the wind, they had plenty of wind. The carrier was going as fast as it could probably at that time, safely. There's one taken off. I think there's an angle that shows he's not off that quick, but you can see that was one of the first ones. We could count up tails and divide by 2, but that was early in the takeoff sequence. Number 7 either had his flaps up and accidentally put them down or forgot to put them up. He took off, sunk down into ground effect. Doolittle thought, oh no, he's in the drink. Came back up and survived. Just a great shot of a B-25. So all 16 launched by 9 a.m. with extra fuel. Arrived in Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, 5 or 6 hours. They had different targets. I don't know if it was 444. The beacon at Chaochu was not activated. The good news is, in spite of that early launch, they had a pretty good sized tailwind. And so they did their bombing and just barely, little here, little there, but Japan was very aware of what happened, and so were a lot of the people in Japan. That's just a shot of a B-25 doing a bomb run somewhere in the Pacific, probably. They did achieve complete surprise. They did minimal damage. They avoided all imperial locations because, as we know at the end of the war, and they realized this, the emperor's position in society, they needed to deal with him probably, which turned out to be exactly right. Sorry. Longest B-25 flight. The only time in World War II an Army aircraft launched from a U.S. Navy ship, and it couldn't have been at a better time. This is what happened to a lot of the crews. As you know, that was way longer. They were running out of gas when they got to the coast. The Chinese assisted them because they had been at war with Japan for a number of years. One plane diverted and landed in the Soviet Union, and the 5-man crew were comfortably detained, and the Soviets let them escape. One plane was shot down, the crew captured. 2 KIAs ditching, 1 KIA killed in action, bailing out. Total of 8 captured, 3 were executed, 1 died of malnutrition, 4 were captive for 40 months. There's Doolittle and the men that were gathering up in China on their way home. Angered the Japanese leaders to no effect because they told the Japanese people, look, we're starting this war, it's going to be over, America will make a deal. It tied down many fighter planes because a lot of people weren't sure exactly where they came from. Even the Japanese leaders said these are Army bombers. They're coming from Korea, they're coming from the Philippines, or so they were trying to figure this out. So it created a lot of uncertainty in the Japanese military, which is what you want to do, right? In war. You want to let them think and maybe make a poor decision. Set up the Battle of Midway in June, 2 months later. We'll talk about that. Inspired everybody. Doolittle in the Medal of Honor, retired as a 4-star general. Looked like when he got back, he was a little thin. Right? And he got another award, 1980s, Barry Goldwater, President Reagan. I mentioned Midway. The Japanese were so upset about this whole thing that they rushed their plans for Midway. And they also were worried about the U.S., so part of their carrier fleet was up near Alaska. And so when they went into Midway, we were reading their code, right? And you saw the movie. And so it was a little bit of a who caught who first, but really almost like a boxer, Doolittle Raid set up a left jab for the Midway, which sunk all 4 carriers that were in Pearl Harbor. And we've all seen the movie, we know the story. So Midway was a major turning point in the Pacific in World War II. It sort of even the particularly the capital ships a little bit. And we were building ships by that time. So any questions on the Doolittle Raid?